The #1 rule in fantasy football is to avoid players who are already injured. So here are 10 injury situations you need to know for this year. Now, Odell Beckham Jr. is expected to miss anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks. And he is a free agent, but it's expected that he wants to stay in LA personally, and he'll be back with the Rams. So if he was going to miss 10 to 12 weeks, he's likely to return at the end of November or likely the beginning of December. Now, despite this, Odell Beckham is still being drafted in fantasy drafts, and he goes pretty early. Like, he's going around Julio Jones, who is expected to sign with a team like the Packers or the Ravens and is healthy right now. And he even goes before potential starting wide receivers like Bryan Edwards in Atlanta and Zay Jones, who signed a decent contract in Jacksonville. And now, fellas, the biggest thing here is that those guys that we just talked about, they're clearly healthy when Odell is not. Now, J.K. Dobbins is assumed to be behind on his injury recovery. It's been suggested that the injury is worse than previously reported. And even Coach John Harbaugh just recently this summer stated for the first time, so this should give you some red flags, that Dobbins could start training camp on the PUP list, the PUP, physically unable to perform, would not play the first 6 games. And it's also worth pointing out that this wasn't a normal ACL tear for Dobbins. He also injured his LCL, which makes it a longer injury recovery time and an increased chance at re-injury. So who benefits if Dobbins misses time? Well, let's discuss. Backup running back Gus Edwards also tore his ACL last year. But unlike Dobbins, this was just an isolated tear, just in that ACL. So it's going to be a quicker injury recovery time for a back who's not that old. And if you don't know how good Gus Edwards is, let me explain this to you. There have only been 2 running backs of all time who have ever had 700 plus yards and averaged 5 yards per carry to start their careers for 3 years. The first man is Nick Chubb, who a lot of people believe is maybe the best pure runner in football, and the second is Gus Edwards. Now, despite this skill and a good offense and potentially going to be the starter for week 1 and beyond, and maybe even 6+ weeks, Gus Edwards currently goes outside the top 50 backs. That's a mistake. Now, next up, Michael Gallup right here is expected to miss at least 6 weeks. He had a very late ACL tear. I mean, it was in January. He didn't have the surgery until mid-January for something that usually takes like 10 to 12 months to come back from. Yet your friends are still drafting Gallup in round 9, ahead of guys like Rondale Moore, Kenny Golladay, and way ahead of guys who had top 10 target shares in the NFL last year, like Jacoby Myers. Now, here's who's going to benefit in Dallas with Gallup out. Rookie 3rd-round pick Jalen Tolbert is expected to start, and he was dominant in college. He had a 33% target share. He earned that many targets compared to his teammates. That's top 4% of all time. And then Dalton Schultz will also benefit. Of course, guys like CeeDee Lamb will, but he's already a top 12 pick. There's not much value there. I believe Schultz, where he goes in drafts right now, is a value. He already had 104 targets last year, and now there's no Amari Cooper or Gallup to start the season. Now, this next guy is very interesting because Michael Thomas is still not practicing. And like I said, we don't want to draft injured players, but he's had over a year to recover. If Thomas is able to get on the field at some point in July, he's going to become an instant value. However, you need to start making 1st-round pick Chris Olave more of a priority. The Saints traded up to get Chris Olave. They traded up their 1st-round pick, they swapped those, but then they gave a 3rd and a 4th. And when you factor in how they acquired some of these picks, it really breaks down to 5 total draft picks in all were exchanged for Chris Olave, which is historic, and that incentivizes heavy usage. Next up, we have stud wide receiver Chris Godwin, who's expected to miss at least 6 weeks, and reports are saying closer and closer this might be a November or December type of an injury. Because similar to J.K. Dobbins, this wasn't just an ACL tear. It wasn't isolated. He also injured his MCL during this injury. A longer recovery time is needed. However, Godwin still goes as a top 30 wide receiver. He goes right around where Darnell Mooney goes, and this is in the 5th round, and even goes ahead of guys like Amari Cooper, Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys who are healthy and are not going to miss the first 6 to 10 weeks of the year. So now here's who's going to benefit in Tampa Bay. Now, of course, Mike Evans benefits, but like the CeeDee Lamb comparison, he's probably going to be a top 15 pick when it's all said and done. Not much value there. Russell Gage is going to be the clear number 2 option with Gronk retired for Tom Brady. And you can very confidently, maybe not 100%, but close, high, right? A high percentage that Russell Gage, he's going to set a new touchdown career high with 5 or more. And now for the rest of the depth chart here at wide receiver, it's going to be interesting because Tyler Johnson has been a guy who's been there. He actually has experience starting when Chris Godwin is out. He actually sees a 62% increase in his targets. The problem is he has not done a good job separating in the NFL. So there's a good chance you see Mike Evans on the outside, Russell Gage go into the slot, and then another outside receiver is used, but that's where it can get really just rotating. It might be Brashad Perriman. It might be Cyril Grayson, who was nice at the end of last year. It might be Scotty Miller. It could be just a rotation. So the biggest benefits here, more than likely, Russell Gage. Now, next up, we got to talk about the running back, James Robinson, because this fella right here, he ended up tearing his Achilles late in the year last year, which is not good. It was at the end of December. And based on this date, experts are expecting him to only be 60% healthy by week 1. Yes, Cam Akers came back in record timing, but that is an outlier to this point, and he also was the least efficient running back in the league when he came back, so he wasn't himself. These same experts don't expect him to be 100% healthy until late November, early December. So what does this mean? What is the result here? Well, it means last year's 1st-round pick Travis Etienne is the clear starter. But we must note that he's also coming off of a serious injury. The Liz Frank injury is no joke, especially for running backs. past. There's not a good track record for this in the past. However, he sustained this injury last August, so by the time the season starts, it'll be about a 13th month recovery, when normally backs start to get back to form around 11 or 12 months. Expect him to be good by week 1. Now, first round wide receiver Jameson Williams is expected to miss at least 4 to 6 weeks. And like Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, the Lions, they traded up for him in the draft. So there's a good chance they don't rush him back, especially from an ACL tear that was sustained later in the year in January. There's rumors out there that say Halloween, which would mean he misses 7 to 8 weeks, is the time that he'll return. And this is who will benefit in Detroit if that happens. DJ Shark was signed this past off season, and he'll now start in 2 wide receiver sets with Williams out. Now, Shark's going to fill that speed void for the offense, and if Jared Goff can connect with him is the question here, but he'll have the opportunity. And his last 2 times having the opportunity as a full-on starter, he finished 19th and 40th overall, an average finish around wide receiver 30. Yet he currently goes in drafts as the wide receiver 69, and believe it or not, he's dropping. As the news gets worse on Jameson Williams' injury recovery and we get more clarity there, he's actually dropped from being the wide receiver 65 earlier this offseason to now the wide receiver 69, and you can take advantage of that. Now let's have a conversation around Bobby Tree's Mr. Robert Woods, who also has sustained an ACL tear last year. Now he is luckier than some other guys we've talked about because this was, or more fortunate at least, this was not in December or January, it was in the beginning of November. Now the downside for Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, is that he's 30 years old, which in the context of the NFL, real life, you're in the prime, you're rocking, you're rolling, but in the context of the NFL, it's a little bit older there. And because of this, it pushes him towards more of a 10 to 12 month recovery, and here's what this means. It means that his best case scenario is he returns week 1, and he's practicing right now, so that's good news. But the worst case scenario is that he does miss a month or a month and a half, 6 weeks of the season. And here's who would benefit. This is the depth chart. You would see Treylon Burks be the clear wide receiver 1. You would see new addition Austin Hooper at the tight end position have a good chance week in and week out to lead this team in targets. But the name that I want to focus on is this guy right here, Mr. Kyle Phillips. Phillips was one of the most agile wide receivers we saw at this year's combine. He was a 5th round pick as well, so it's not like he was an undrafted free agent. He had top 10% agility of all time. And he had a top 8%, 31% of the targets he earned in his offense while at college. Again, top 8% of all time. That is very good. It shows that he can get open. That's where the agility comes into play, and earn targets. Now, Patriots running back James White, he ended up dislocating his hip last September. And it forced him, when you include the playoff game, to miss the final 15 games of the Patriots season. Now, hip injuries, they might not seem like it, but they are a very complicated injury to recover from. And like Robert Woods, it doesn't help that James White is 30 years old. So James White isn't expected to be ready week 1, and the Patriots can kind of sense this. They drafted 2 running backs. Pierre Strong, they drafted in the 4th round, who has some speed, can catch the ball, profiles out to be like a James White replacement. And then in the 6th round, they went with Kevin Harris, who's more of a downhill runner. Now, White's contract was up, so the Patriots re-signed him, and they gave him $500,000, 500 G's guaranteed, which in the real world is a top 1% earner. It's fantastic. But the context of the NFL, anything below $2 million in guaranteed basically puts you in a category where you could be an expenditure. You can be cut and you don't think twice about it. Now, I currently have James White as my running back 70 in my tiers, which is well below ADP, so I'm going to have legitimately 0 shares of him this year, and you will too if you're using these. But let's have some fun. Let's try something new. If you secure the Supreme cheat sheet using the link via Prize Picks below, I'll also throw in a $20 Amazon gift card that I could send to that same email you use when you sign up. And if you don't like the guide, I'll refund your minimum deposit of $10, and you can keep the $20 Amazon gift card. So click the link below to learn more and acquire your $20 gift card and the cheat sheet. Now, another rookie wide receiver to talk about, this time in the 2nd round, the 44th overall pick, John Mechie from Alabama, goes to the Texans, and he's expected to probably miss the start of the year because he tore his ACL in December. Now, luckily for him, it was the beginning of December, not late December, so there is actually a chance, it's a slim chance, but a chance he could be ready week 1. More likely he'll miss 1 or 2 weeks. And his absence would lead to this guy right here, Brandon Cooks, who I believe is a top 20 wide receiver. It would lead to him going in the slot more. Last year, Cooks played 187 snaps in the slot, which was about a quarter of his snaps, 23 or 24%. But here's the interesting part. Cooks was tied for 12th on how effective, how efficient he was on a per snap basis out of the slot. And this was ahead of guys that we know. I mean, Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, we know to be elite receivers. So you really want to be cautious and probably steer clear of most, if not all, of these guys. But if you want to see 5 guys that your friends mistakenly are avoiding in drafts, then check out this video right here. And let me say it one more time for you. Do not draft players who are already injured.